Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this special episode of Power Plays and Paydays here on EBnet.Stream. I'm joined today by retired Colonel Chris Wyatt from the US Army, or retired from the US Army. Chris, welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Well, Leon, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to join you today on the program. I hope that we have an interesting conversation.
Sure we will. I can guarantee you that I've got plenty of questions that our audience would like to hear your view on. I've watched a number of your podcasts, and you've always been, let's say, direct and honest in your opinion. You can never be accused of not putting your opinion across. But before we get to that, because that's the interest that I have in talking to you, I've always been amazed when I look behind you, the rugby balls. I've seen you in a Springbok jersey before. What is your background specifically with South Africa? But I know also from your Army career, you've had a lot of experience with Africa.
Well, with South Africa specifically, it all kind of started for me back in the 1970s as a youth. I was watching, not South Africa specifically, but I would go to the library in school and read the magazines, Time, Newsweek, and U.S. News and World Report, when they were still media outlets, not propaganda outlets, which they've all become in the 21st century. So I would read these magazines, and I'd follow the Bush War in Rhodesia and what was happening in Angola and in Mozambique. And I read a book by James Stockwell. He was a CIA agent who went into Angola, and we propped up Holden Roberto and the FNLA, the Front for the National Liberation of Angola, which was the losing dog in that fight. It was not the right group to back, but we backed them. I read his book about what the CIA did there, and I was fascinated by it as a young man, about how we were involved in what was happening as the colonial era was coming to an end in Africa. So my interest started there. And then also back in those days, they had Soldier of Fortune magazine was kind of big. And I followed all these conflicts, many of them in Africa. So I became interested in that, in the military and in the history of colonial Africa, and then Africa later on. So that's where it got started. But then I was a freshman at university on a Friday afternoon. One of the upperclassmen after our leadership laboratory said to me, "Hey, so you coming to the game tonight?" I'm like, "The game's tomorrow." He goes, "No, not football, American football, not football, rugby." I'm like, "Man, I'm from Appalachia. We just got paved roads and electricity last year. We don't play rugby. I've heard of it. I know what it is, but I've never seen it." He goes, "It's okay. Come on down to the band fields. You'll have a good time. You'll meet women." I'm like, "Okay, I'm there." So I went and I discovered the game of rugby. And then as a student of history, I was a history major at university. I wanted to follow rugby, but it wasn't on television. It wasn't a professional sport in the early 1980s. And we never had on television because we didn't even have a national side. Our Olympic champions won 1920 and 24 in France. We won because we took a bunch of college kids from California and around the country and put a team together and went out and won the gold medal twice in a row. So until Rio in 2016, we were defending Olympic champions in rugby, much to the chagrin of England and South Africa and the All Blacks. We were the champions. No longer, but we were. Anyway, so that sparked my interest in rugby, and I looked for a team I could support. No way I could possibly support England or France,
Good choice.
Australia, All Blacks. Well, I mean, I'm interested in Africa. South Africa has an interesting history. The Springboks. I became a Springboks fan. And shortly after that, I became a Western Province fan. And sorry for your Bulls supporters. They're just going to have to suffer through that. I became a Province fan and then ultimately a Stormers later on. But I began self-teaching myself Afrikaans in the 1980s. And the first question I got was, "What are you, racist?" I'm like, "Why?" "That's the language of oppression." I said, "Well, tell that to the 5 million colored South Africans who speak it as their first language. They'll probably take offense." And I always get these strange looks. And that's kind of where my interest in South Africa grew from. And then when I left the Army I was at university, and then went in the Army for years, went back to university, finished up. And when I went back to university, my focus was on Africa, specifically for history and Southern Africa in particular. And so I did a lot of research and studying on Africa, and then came back in the Army as an intelligence officer. And from there, later become a foreign area officer for Sub-Saharan Africa, and lived and worked in Tunisia, Liberia, Botswana, Malawi, Niger, Mauritania, Uganda, and Ethiopia, and have worked in about 40 African countries.
Okay. So South Africa has been in the news, I think, for the wrong reasons now for quite a period of time. But obviously, what's been particularly interesting is under the presidency of Donald Trump. So the noise, if I could put it that way, started with talk about white genocide and so on, and ultimately ended up with that, how can I put it? Interesting meeting in the Oval Office that I'm still trying to get my head around. I find the rhetoric around white genocide a bit strange because it's not the reality for us as white people in South Africa. Yes, there's terrible violence, and yes, you can say that there is discrimination taking place through the workforce and so on. But there are some real issues that I thought were quite critical that President Trump was raising around triple BEE foreign policy and so on, that I feel has been sort of overlooked in the context of then this white genocide and the refugees moving to the US. What is your view on that? And then also, what is your view particularly on that meeting in the Oval Office?
Well, my view on the white genocide thing is this is largely a fabrication and used to discredit their opponents by the leftist politicians and the media in South Africa. You'll notice that Trump has only, to my recollection, brought the term up 3 times without someone asking me a question. Virtually every time that white genocide and Trump are mentioned, it's in response to a question, such as the Oval Office when Annika Larson asked him the question, Mr. Trump, with President Ramaphosa here now, do you still believe in the white genocide story? To which Trump responded, and nobody in South Africa's media ever bothered to report, well, I'm not convinced of that. That was a verbatim Trump quote. I'm not convinced of that. But instead, they raised this false narrative that he's bringing up. It's an effort to tar and feather your opponent with what they consider a weak argument. The argument about a genocide is not weak. There are stages of genocide. It isn't just people just go out and start murdering people tomorrow like they did in Rwanda. There are phases of that, demonizing your opponent, belittling them, dehumanizing them, blocking them from access to. Look, the Jews weren't all killed in concentration camps in 1933. That took years for that to happen. It's so, look, I'm not arguing there's a genocide or again, there's a cultural genocide, the Afrikaans language and culture. That's for damn sure. There's no doubt about that. I mean, renaming places that never existed that were built by a group of people, name it something else. And efforts like Stellenbosch, the land was given a perpetuity on the premise that the language of instruction, the meeting would be Afrikaans, and Afrikaans students are now ostracized, abused at that school, and the language is being phased out repeatedly. So as far as the genocide issue, to me, it's a red herring that's constantly used to demonize opponents. Most of the people that bring it up are actually leftist politicians, the ANC, and South Africa's media, and here in America. And on the refugee issue, not one refugee has come to America on the basis of white genocide. That's a canard. That's a red herring. Every single South African refugee who's come to America, whether they're white, colored, Indian, or black, there are a few black South Africans who've come under this program, have come here under the premise of racial persecution, which is the international standard. Racial, religious, political, sexual orientation. These things are justification for refugee status under international standards, which U.S. law complies with, the Immigration Nationality Act. This is all canard, and it's all spread about to distract from the argument. The argument is that the people that are coming over are suffering from racial persecution. And you and I and our audience that are listening to this aren't sitting in the interviews that the U.S. immigration officials are hearing from these people. If they're not legitimate cases, they can't articulate past persecution or genuine fear of future persecution, they will not come over. It's as simple as that. And if they're caught lying later on, they'll be sent back to their point of origin. So that's the reality of the situation. As far as the Oval Office meeting, that's another canard that was presented by the media, especially in South Africa, but also in America, as a ambush. Ramaphosa was ambushed. No, let's recall events. Ramaphosa urgently asked for a meeting with the President of the United States. He cleared his calendar because of the nature of the relationship to bring and let Ramaphosa come over. Then Ramaphosa arrived for the President of the United States 43 minutes tardy. Who does that? I mean, the cheek of that. What does he think? He's the Sultan of Brunei, just wandering in when he wants to. And then he went into the meeting and it was presented as a ambush, but it wasn't an ambush. Ramaphosa lied about events there. He misled. I mean, there's no way that Ramaphosa did not know about those crosses in response to Glenn and Vita Rafferty's murder. There was a sign at the end of it. It was in every South African newspaper, it was on every broadcast. SABC covered it, and he's going to say, "Mr. President, where's this at?" It's ridiculous. Trump was very restrained and very in control. He could have embarrassed Ramaphosa so badly. Not one person that was in the video was a current member of the ANC who'd said racist things about South Africans or attacked America's interest. He didn't bring up the fact that South Africans hosted pilots to train Chinese fighter pilots to shoot down NATO and American aircraft. Didn't do that. Didn't put down anything about all the other transgressions that the ANC has done against U.S. national interests over the past 20 years, like not signing an Article 98 waiver to protect our troops. So the people that were in the video were people who are no longer in the ANC. It gave Ramaphosa political out to say, well, these people aren't in the ANC. We're dealing with this. But no, he lied to President Trump. It was not an ambush. And it was the most embarrassing international situation I've seen a head of state perform in decades. It was shocking to see how badly it went for Ramaphosa.
And who invited the likes of Business South Africa and that of Johan Rupert and the golfers? Found that was an awfully strange thing to happen. I mean, when has that ever happened before?
Well, those things do happen. I mean, look, Elon Musk was in the room. He was no longer associated with the effort to clean up the government. He was a private citizen at that point. So from the American side, Elon Musk was invited in because he's originally from South Africa, had an understanding of South Africa, presumably. I believe that they were all brought over by Ramaphosa. That's who invited them in. I believe that's the case. I may be mistaken about that. But yes, that is very unusual. In fact, most of us who are looking at this like, oh, kind of like when Ramaphosa said, have you met my white minister of agriculture? I mean, when was that reported in South Africa's press? Talk about racist and stupid. I mean, why would you say that? And so the same thing, a lot of us view that, hey, look, President Trump, we're okay with you. Look, we've invited all your rich white friends from South Africa. That did not come across well.
But it actually talks to my next question, and I find this increasingly in South Africa. A lot of us as citizens of South Africa have, I wouldn't say overcome all the race issues, but we have evolved, if I could put it that way, and we see race less. But it's our government, or in particular the ANC and certain other parties, that keep on bringing back race as the point of contention, the debate the whole time. And we're tired of it. We're tired of hearing about who's black and who's white and whatever. What we want to see is we want to see growth. We want to see jobs. We want to see prosperity. We want to see delivery, all of the things that you just expect as any normal citizen, regardless of whether we're black, white, or not. So my question to you is, do you think the likes of the US government sees the difference between, call it, the population and then the ruling party? Or is it a case of, I'm sorry, you're voting them in, so you're going to be painted with the same brush?
Well, I agree with your premise that most South Africans don't really care about race. It's utter nonsense used by politicians. Unfortunately, it's amplified by social media and by legacy media, who really distort the picture about what's happening in South Africa at every opportunity, whether it's Vox putting a picture up, look at the racial disparities, this nice plush village in Cape Town, right next to it, informal settlements. Well, yeah, that wasn't there 5 years ago. Those people were allowed to move in there illegally and erect shacks and steal land. And that's why you have that. It's not because of income disparity. They came from somewhere. So do I think the U.S. government can see the distinction between the population and the political parties? Absolutely. I do speak on occasion to senior figures in the administration and in the government, and I did it with the previous government as well. And I did it when I was in uniform. Obviously, I worked in the intelligence community back then. And I believe that people in power do see a difference between the government of South Africa and the people of South Africa. And I agree with you. It's very frustrating. Like, I get painted with a brush by people all the time who are just bigots and racists because they look at a person and make a decision about who they are. They talk of this nonsense that I promote, white supremacy. Really? Then why am I going to the Basotho cultural village on the edge of the Golden Gate Park promoting Basotho culture and advising people they should learn about the Sotho people? Why do I take the trouble to learn Tswana, Ke Motswana? I used to live in Botswana. Why do I promote Tswana, Sotho people, and Afrikaans speaking as well as colored? And I'm the only person that's ventured up to Uppington to speak to Oma Katarina Esau, a 90-plus-year-old first language speaker of the new language, because I promote all South Africans. But the problem is that the environment is toxic because of the media and politicians and social media. But most South Africans agree with you. They don't care about race. That they're past that. And it's the same with Americans. Most Americans are past that. It's the politicians who try to drag us all back into it. And yes, don't get me wrong. There's racists and bigots. There's always going to be stupid people. But the good thing is it's a very small number in South Africa and America, but not amongst politicians.
What suits their own wallet, I suppose. But the trade relations, there's obviously been a lot of debate around that, whether we're in negotiations, not in negotiations. Triple BE is a hindrance from a US perspective. Can you just give a bit of insight in your perspective in terms of whether there are discussions and are there any chances of reaching some kind of a compromise there?
To my knowledge, there have been virtually no discussions. South Africa has no ambassador in Washington over a year now, since Ibrahim Rasool was sent packing for his abysmal conduct. as an ambassador. There is no trade representative designated from the South African government to the U.S. There's no trade delegation in Washington. There have been discussions on the sidelines of a few mid-level and low-level meetings here and there, but there's no real trade negotiations. The ANC is hoodwinking, but of course I say ANC because they control all foreign policy. It's not anyone else at the GNU. They have been hoodwinking the South African public, falsely claiming that they've negotiated, they made offers. No, you don't make an offer. Funny how South Korea, Japan, China, Vietnam, the European Union, all these different countries, the UK and organizations reached trade deals with Trump. Switzerland had their tariff low. It was hot. It's the South African government and the media. Oh, they're aggressive towards South Africa. They're picking on us. Trump imposed tariffs on 90 countries. Mm-hmm. South Africa got a 30% tariff. Lesotho got a 90% tariff. It got negotiated down to 10%. Switzerland had a 39% tariff. They negotiated down to 19%. South Africa has done nothing. They're one of the few countries made no genuine effort to deal with this. And before people say what's unfair, no, it's not unfair. South Africa's trade policies have been very harmful to America, imposing 70% tariffs on our poultry products to keep them out of your marketplace to protect your failing poultry industry, putting quotas on our automobiles that can come over there and our industrial goods, then also banning our pork products. All the while, for 25 years, South Africa enjoyed preferential trade status better than the Europeans. You had the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act. You could ship 1,800 products and services under that, plus 5,800 other goods and services under the General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs. So basically, South Africans ship almost anything to America with no duty. That's why we're buying BMW parts manufacturing in Port Elizabeth and Uitenhage, because those parts came in duty-free. They were cheaper than the German parts, which had a tariff on them by the same company, BMW. And it's been very unfair to Americans. And it's not just South Africa. Trump has finally said enough of this. We've been getting raked over the coals. We can have a legitimate argument about whether the tariffs were excessive. That's a fair argument. But the reason for the tariffs was not crazy. And to quote Justice Malala, who disappointed me, he called Trump's tariffs demonic. Well, only if you've been getting over in America and now you're suddenly not getting over. Maybe unfair, but certainly not demonic. It was long overdue. And as far as trade, this is not going to improve for South Africa. And John Steenhuisen going to Vietnam and negotiating the sale of stone fruit is not going to make up for the billions, the 20 plus billion in annual trade between the U.S. and South Africa. It just isn't going to happen.
Yeah, and what I find a pity of that, I mean, you can argue about your views on Trump's approach, and I don't think it was any different to South Africa as well as to any other country. But the reality was, we've chosen not to negotiate to a point that ultimately just hurts us. I mean, we need the fixed investment in this country in order to drive up growth and to create jobs. So we are shooting the poor man straight in the heart by not actually finding that compromise, unfortunately, and rather looking at it, I think, almost a bit immaturely to say we're friends with the Russians and with the Chinese and we can make it up through all of that, and that's just exacerbating problems even further. So I'm aware of the fact that there are some bills, is it that have gone to the House around sanctions for individuals within not just the ANC but other influential individuals?
There are pieces of legislation introduced in the House and Senate. In the House by Ronnie Jackson, a Texas member of Congress who was Obama and Trump's personal physician as a Navy doctor, as a same rank as me. He's a captain, a colonel. So he retired from the Navy after serving the White House and 2 administrations, and then ran for Congress, very popular in Texas, got elected. He introduced a bill early last year, right after he came into Congress, in which he proposed that they review the strategic relationship with South Africa with a view towards sanctioning the ANC and its senior leaders for harming our interest. Now, that's not new. There was a bill previously introduced the previous year under the under the Biden administration by a Democrat and Republican, co-sponsored by both parties, to do exactly the same thing before Trump ever came in office. See, the misnomer and the fallacy here is that this is all about Trump. It's not. The United States Congress is fed up with South Africa's behavior and has been for several years. This has been building for years as the ANC continually harms our interests and our friends, partners, and allies. And there's a whole laundry list of things I could run through, but I'm not going to do now because we have limited time. But the bottom line here is that this isn't Trump. It's just Trump is the first one doing something substantive about it. In the Senate, John Kennedy, the very colorful senator from Louisiana, who has some really good quips, he introduced almost an identical measure. Both bills are in there. The interesting thing is that the House bill got to the floor rather quickly. Sometimes these bills linger for months, but that's been on the floor since July, but it hasn't advanced. So right now, these bills aren't going anywhere, and there's no effort to sanction anyone in the ANC. And even if those bills are signed by the president, it requires an investigation to make a determination, and this is months away if that ever comes true.
EBnet is proud to bring you top quality content from experts across the financial services industry in South Africa and internationally, for free. Your support helps us in doing this. All we ask is that you subscribe to our channels by clicking the subscribe button below. Share this video with others you think will benefit from it, and give us thumbs up if you are enjoying the content. That way, you help us help you. Thank you from the team at EBnet. For more great content, please visit www.ebnet.co.za.
Okay, so I was about to ask you then the foreign policy and our friendship playing war games off the coast of the Cape with China, Russia, and Iran, where that's now leaving us, especially in the context of the war that has just begun with Iran. Should we be expecting any aircraft carriers with a view of Table Mountain soon?
No, because all we have to do is fly one commercial flight with a Marine platoon and take over the country. So I'm going to get flamed for that one, but let's be honest here. I mean, it's not very difficult. The SANDF can't feed its troops when they respond to the July 2021 crisis. They had to jump the queue at ShopRite in front of the thousands of people, the one ShopRite that wasn't burned to the ground during the looting, because they had no food. They have no intelligence. They don't know what's going on in the country. They have three Type 209 diesel submarines, none of which are operational, which they spent hundreds of millions of dollars for. They have 2 Gripen fighters that are operational, but only 1 qualified pilot to fly them. They had to fly the Hawk lead-in fighter trainers for the presidential State of the Nation address because the Gripens couldn't get in the air. The ships can't sail. Only one of them can get at sea at a time. It's pathetic and it's sad. No, the U.S. will not be sending military to South Africa. There's no justifiable reason for that. But the government should be very concerned. This is going to elevate the situation as the United States looks for, I don't want to say payback, but certainly for accountability for those who have fostered and supported the Iranian terror regime. I mean, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps sent their ships, a designated terrorist group, to participate in a naval exercise. And then the government of South Africa said, oh no, the Chinese arranged this. It's your sovereign waters. You tell us you can't control your sovereign waters. You allow them to dock at your port facilities. Look, this is not a good look for South Africa, nor is this relationship with Cuba or Russia or China or Venezuela for that matter. Right now, whether he intended to or not, Donald Trump is taking all of the ANC's friends off the chessboard. He's removed Nicolas Maduro and the criminal regime in Venezuela. The mullahs in Iran are disappearing now. That's 2 down. Trump continues to focus on Putin and Russia, which is another friend of the ANC. And China is trying to play nice with the U.S. while attacking the U.S. simultaneously, which creates a very psychotic relationship with the U.S. And then, the only thing is the only rogue state that they're not really friends with is North Korea, I guess. But that's a whole other story. So Trump is eliminating the ANC's friends. That's not his intent, but in practice, that's what's actually happening here. The African National Congress will find itself increasingly isolated on the world stage. The Europeans have not engaged because they still live in the fantasy world of April 27th of 1994. They think it's Rainbow Nation, Ubuntu. They think all is well in South Africa when it's not. It's not. South Africa's economy is not going to improve anytime soon as long as racist legislation remains in place. If I can't start a business and employ my own sons because I have a handful of employees and I have too many white men in management positions who are my sons, how can I have a successful business? If I can't, here's another one. Walmart just opened up in Boksburg. Take a look at the photograph of all the employees. Boksburg is 43% white, colored, and Indian. Virtually no whites, coloreds, Indians employed. 99, 100% of the employees that show up there were black. What is that all about? Are white people, Indians, and coloreds lazy and don't want to work at Walmart? Or are they being actively discriminated against? I'm getting really tired of people who deny what's happening in South Africa. This is a reality. And it was morally bankrupt when the National Party did it. And it's just as morally, if not more morally bankrupt, when a majority oppresses a minority. It's real. People want to hide in the hole and pretend it's not real, but it is real. Fortunately, most South Africans are rational people and don't believe in this nonsense.
I do think that the psychology, though, given the history, was that when democracy came about, we as South Africans knew that there had to be change. And the change that was put on the table were the quotas, transformation, triple BE, and we accepted it, I suppose, naively, but I think more concerning is that we were all too scared to challenge it out of fear of being then painted as racist and ostracized in that sense. And no debate happened, no challenge of any sort happen amongst people, that has changed. We started now saying, hang on a second, amongst all people. And that, I think, is more healthy. But the reality is the practices remain, and it's going to take time now for that to ultimately change. But I wanted to quickly check with you: what is the history between Iran and South Africa? Is it a more recent, or is it a far deeper, longer history between the two?
My understanding of the relationship is it's not a deep relationship necessarily, because remember, Iran was in the Shah's camp, a Western ally, until 1979. And then, of course, it wasn't until 1979 that the ANC went to Vietnam, and the Vietnamese communists taught them how to fight a people's war. And that's when the ANC tried to become relevant again by murdering Inkatha Freedom Party leaders, killing 25 to 30,000 members of the Inkatha Freedom Party, necklacing all the crimes against humanity that they committed in KZN in particular, but around the country. That's when that began to change. And that was their focus while they were still banned in the country. When they became unbanned, those relationships, I don't know that they really built them all that strong. Maybe they did in the background. But from my perspective, the relationship between Iran and South Africa is fostered because the historic relationship between the ANC and the Palestinian Liberation Organization, which by extension winds up being later Hamas and others. And so they have this affinity with the Palestinians, much like Muammar Gaddafi had, from a liberation movement standpoint. And they've got this mentality stuck in their head. They can't get around the fact that the Palestinians were offered everything by Ehud Barak in the 1990s when Clinton was president, and they refused. Now we're hearing about how there has to be a two-state solution. Well, Israel offered a two-state solution in the 1990s, and the Palestinians under Yasser Arafat flatly denied it. They refused it. They didn't want it. They wanted the Jews and the Christians kicked out of the Holy Land. They didn't want them there. They wanted it all for themselves. And so the ANC has strange bedfellows. Those strange bedfellows led to a relationship, in my view, with the Iranians, who are sponsors of Hamas as a proxy, as well as Hezbollah and the Houthis. And so they've spread chaos, terror, and death throughout the Middle East as an Iranian terrorist state. And that's how the relationship grew from there. They have common ground. We've seen Lady Pandor congratulate Hamas on murdering 1,200 people, a congratulatory phone call, and she had no compunction about the world knowing that she did that. She was proud of it. She's still proud of it, although she seems to be hiding in a bunker now as the United States and Israel attack Iran. I wonder where she's at. But yeah, no, I think that that's where that relationship grew from, was their historical ties to the Palestinian people.
So the war that's now started off, what do you see as being not so much the intent, but the end game? Is it a case of regime change, and how would that happen without any sort of what's the right word? Second party, or there's a better word for it, I just can't remember it now.
Well, probably you mean you're getting to like an international intervention on the ground or something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah. So does it need to put boots on the ground, because there's no opposition party? Sorry, was the word that I was looking for. So how do you organize these guys in order to facilitate regime change, or is it a case of hoping that someone steps up or the army takes over or something?
Well, those are fair points and good questions, but the Trump administration is holding their plans close to the vest. They're not really explaining how they're doing that right now. So we can have lots of supposition analysis. Some people are calling for the return of the Shah. I think that's a bad idea. His son, 65 years old, claims the throne and wants to come back. I don't think that's necessarily a good solution for Iranians. There's a lot of sentiment for that in America. We have over 800,000 Iranians, Persians, who live in America, who fled during the Shah's time as he wrapped up and subsequently. Many of them have strong feelings and would love to see the Iranian royal family restored. That's a minority view, in my opinion. There are others who hope that some sort of opposition will rise up. I don't think that's possible. I think that what has to happen, in my view, if you want Iran to be a responsible player on the world stage, is denazification. Denazification. No one who's ever served in the revolutionary parliament should ever be allowed to serve in a government office anywhere ever again. And if that leads to a vacuum, then it will lead to a vacuum. But I don't think that's the case, because hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of Iranians would like to go home, and they have skills. They've built lives in the UK, in France, in the US and elsewhere. And many of them want to come back and invest and be back in there, and they can fill these positions. Whether they're wanted by the people who stayed is a different story. But there are lots of different ways this could play out. But regime change is definitely in the cards. There's no doubt that the regime change is now an objective. Trump even said it yesterday, I think. So that's definitely going to happen one way or another. Also, the Iranian military is going to be neutered. We've pretty much sank their entire fleet now. As of last night, there's no capital ships left that are floating that I'm aware of, although media reports could be incorrect. But we're also getting these reports from Central Command, and unless they've assessed battle damage assessment incorrectly, they have no reason to lie to us, because it'll just come back and haunt them. So as far as I know, there's no Iranian Navy. and there will soon be no Iranian Air Force. They've pretty much been taken out. Even the Qataris are shooting down Iranian aircraft now. They shot down 2 Sukhoi 24s, and they shot down, it's so, look, this is not going to go well for the regime. They're gone. They're on their deathbed. And what comes after this is anybody's guess. But I suspect there may be a need for some sort of international force, maybe not military, but some sort of political force that comes in that has some kind of authority with police support and gives them some authority. And I think Iran needs a denazification campaign.
So the fear was that the Iranians would close down the Straits of Hormuz, and that would end up impacting the oil price. The oil price has already started pricing that in. But if the Navy's been destroyed, is that still possible in some way that they can do that?
It is still possible in some way, specifically because they have lots of rockets and missiles they could target ships with. They also have a lot of small, fast attack boats that we don't know the status of all those. We don't know. I mean, they could also, put a speedboat out there and go up alongside a ship and capture it. So there's lots that they can do. But in order for that not to happen, the U.S. Navy's fleet has to patrol that area. If they patrol that area, then they won't do it. But yeah, I think their ability to enforce it is dramatically reduced because they've lost most of the ships that could be involved. And also their drone attack ship, that was the converted civilian ship, the one that was sunk this week, is no longer available. And that reduces the range of their drones significantly. So they would have to transport drones from far away to get to shore to do these short range missions. So I think that their ability to shut down the Straits of Hormuz is largely hyperbole at this stage, but we can't say it's 100% shut down.
So, Chris, just to sum it up, what I'm hearing is that the current so-called friends of the, call it ANC-led government in South Africa, are becoming isolated one at a time, essentially. That's going to obviously have some kind of an impact on trade with South Africa and harm us in that way. And at the same time, the US remains doors open, but there are hurdles that need to be addressed and compromises that need to be reached. But there's no specific intent from the US to, what's the right word? I don't know if it's harm, but to take action against South Africa any further. It's not like we are top of the radar. In that sense, there's bigger fish to ultimately fry. But what the US would like us to come to the table, sort out the trade relations, and they don't really care if we are friends with the others, provided we're not actually acting against the US. Is that a good summary?
That's a pretty good summary. And the irony here is that while the South African media and politicians like Fikile Mbalula and Ronald Lamola especially, and Cyril Ramaphosa and others have spent and Gwede Mantashe have spent the past year attacking Donald Trump and claiming the U.S. has been aggressive towards South Africa, what has the U.S. done to South Africa, really? The only thing the U.S. has done is we suspended foreign aid. That's what we did. We suspended foreign aid because South Africa has abrogated its own constitution. The South African government has passed a law which Ramaphosa duplicitously claimed to sign at Davos. He'd actually signed it in December, thereby preventing members of parliament from challenging the constitutional court. Because many South Africans don't know that a provision in your constitution is that if a law is passed by parliament, signed by the president, if 1/3 of the members of parliament sign a petition against it and take it to the constitutional court within 30 days, they have an obligation to review it for legality and constitutionality within 30 days. Well, Ramaphosa signed it in December and then made a big deal about signing it at Davos 34 days later so no one could appeal it. So South Africa has abrogated its own constitution. The Africa Growth and Opportunity Act, the International Declaration of Human Rights, both these things come to bear here. Private property rights are paramount, and South Africa has abrogated that. And I don't want to hear the argument, not from you, but from anyone, well, they haven't done anything. It doesn't matter. Why do you pass a law allowing the government at the national, the provincial, and the local level to expropriate a private citizen's property with no justification whatsoever? And as I said, property, not land. This isn't about land. It's about kowtowing the political opposition. If you dare speak up, we just saw SARS today. They got a ruling from the court saying that someone who didn't declare his income abroad, well, now they're going to take a 90% penalty on that person. This is an abusive government that's abusing its citizens, and most citizens are walking blindly through life and don't even see it. They will confiscate your property if you say anything about the government. Anything about the government. That's the purpose of this law. And it doesn't matter whether it's the ANC or the PA or the DA or MK. The government of the day will use these powers to harm their citizens. That's the bottom line. But as far as the U.S. hurting South Africa, my goodness, let's see. Have you been removed from the SWIFT banking system, which would devastate something? No. Have we blocked American companies from investing? No. Have we blocked Americans from traveling there? No. Have we went out and tried to harm your bond market? No. Have we dumped our bonds to destroy your bond market because we have a lot of institutions that have South African bonds? No. We've done nothing to harm South Africa. And we've repeated insult after insult after insult from the ANC. The G20 thing. Ramaphosa walked around making jokes about bad things happening in South Africa and insulting the president of the United States. I'll tell you what, if Trump was a vindictive individual, I mean, you know, Latuli House would be in cinders right now for the behavior of the ANC. It's warranted. It is warranted. It's been unbelievably, horrifically abusive. On CNN's Misinformation White Genocide documentary, which I call a fake documentary, which, by the way, I was involved in. CNN asked me to be part of that. They interviewed me, and I wouldn't lie. So I'm not even in the documentary. I was on the cutting room floor, which is fine. I'm glad I'm not associated with it. But in the documentary, Ronald Lamola sat there on the eve of the G20 and said to Donny O'Donnell, the CNN journalist from Ireland, he said, so you think that the refugee program is a white supremacy program? Yes, it's a white supremacy program because only white Afrikaners can go. Well, first off, that's factually wrong. This is the foreign minister of the country calling Donald Trump a white supremacist on the eve of the G20 conference in South Africa. Unbelievable. The program is open to South Africans who are Afrikaners and racial minorities. Whites, blacks, coloreds, Indians have all come over under the program. That's a fact. He knows it. It's on the U.S. Embassy website. It's been there since 10th of February last year. The United States has done nothing in the face of these egregious insults and these attacks against our nation by the ANC. And frankly, I'm tiring of the narrative from South Africa's media that the United States has harmed South Africa. You know, here's the bottom line. Before you jump in, let me get one last thing out here. Here's two facts to keep in mind. This pivot towards autocrats like Russia, less than 1% of South Africa's total trade is with Russia. The United States does $20+ billion a year in two-way trade, and it's a trade surplus of $8 billion a year for South Africa, benefiting South Africans. Duty-free access until go expired on 30 September. But the South African economy matters not to America. Oh, wait, Natasha, we won't give the minerals. Dude, we'll get the minerals on the third parties on the marketplace. They're fungible commodities. We'll get them elsewhere. There is nothing in South Africa that is so important to America economically that it really matters. It's a rounding error. The trade with South Africa is a fraction of a percentage of our total trade, let alone of our GDP. And South African government doesn't get that. You need us. We don't need you. Now, I don't mean to come across that way, Leon, but that's just a geopolitical statement of fact. I love South Africa. People know me, know that I spend a lot of time promoting South Africa and advocating for South Africa. But the reality is, in a geopolitical sense, South Africa is a rounding area for the United States. And the ANC acts like fools at their own peril, and they should stop it.
Look, I think South Africans get that. There is a bit of ego, I suppose, that comes from the past and being suppressed, and terms like bully will get used and so on. But we've always voted with our hearts. I always say that. We voted with our hearts. We didn't know any different given the history. So that has matured, and the population has started to feel its real life. We started feeling the impact of it. I've been held up at gunpoint driving home before. You drive past the slums and you can see how people are living, and we're starting to now, listen a little bit more. There's a lot more commentary outside of the main media. So from people like yourself, a lot of other podcasts that have shot up, again, of people of all different races that are starting to talk, call it the truth, okay, that you might not always like to hear, but it's making us think. That's the reality. And I think that's the power of the maturity that we're busy developing right now. And it's starting to show in the polls. We'll see what happens with the municipal elections towards the end of this year, but the polls are showing that there's a famous South African saying, you maybe know it, gatvol. We are tired, and we want to see things now move in the right direction. And I've got a lot of confidence that ultimately will happen, given the fact that we're having these discussions. So, Chris, on that note, thank you so much for joining us, for taking the time. I really do appreciate it. Many times I invite people and they absolutely just ignore me. So I was delighted to get a response from you. So from all of us, our community at EBnet, thank you very much for coming on and sharing your views with us. And we wish you all the very best.
Well, thank you so much for the time. It was a pleasure joining you today, and perhaps we can do it again sometime in the future.
That'll be fantastic. All the best. Cheerio.